Okay, we're live. Hi everyone. Welcome to the weekly politics show. I'm Councillor Puru Miah with co-host Councillor Andrew Wood. So in this show, we're joined by veteran journalist Peter Oborne, and we're going to discuss the wider implications of the trial and acquittal of Apsana Begum, MP. And then in the first section, we're going to talk about some of the issues of the decline in our political culture nationally, and some of what Andrew and I picked up locally. Then we're going to talk after the break in the second segment. Peter, Andrew, and I are going to talk about what can we do to actually strengthen our public institutions and actually strengthen the culture of accountability that we're witnessing the decline of. Then in the third segment after the break, Peter's going to go off and it's just going to be an Andrew. And in that segment, Andrew is going to talk about the latest developments, some of the questions that have been put forward to Tower Hamlets Council about their conduct leading up to the prosecution and afterwards. And on final segment, we're going to talk about the local impact, including the Weavers by-election and the different interpretations that are out there as to why we got the result. It's kind of interesting watching social media. So we're going to go shortly into a break. After the break, we're going to go straight into the Apsana Begum trial with guest Peter Oborne, where we're going to discuss the wide implications, starting with our national political culture. So we're just going to go straight. Hi everyone, welcome back to the weekly politics show. I'm Councillor Puru Miah with co-host Councillor Andrew Wood. We're joined on my phone on loudspeaker by veteran journalist Peter Oborne. Peter is well known as an investigative journalist. He wrote for the Daily Telegraph regularly up until 2015, and then for the Daily Mail as their political editor. Also, Peter is known for his investigative journalist pieces, including Channel 4 Dispatches, as well as for the Middle East Eye. Peter has had local involvement in terms of Citizens UK. He was a part of the panel about Muslims in public life. So we're going to kick it off with questions to Peter. Peter, you've written extensively about the decline in our political culture, starting off with the Blair years, where you've been very critical of the political class and the decline of political ethics, the decline in institutions, including the neutrality of the civil service. And you've written extensively, including criticism of the Cameron years. There is a piece that you've put out recently that's been published again by Open Democracy that you originally wrote for the Daily Telegraph. And recently you've written a book critical of the Johnson government and their approach to truth and facts and how they seem to get away with it. Peter, what lessons, in terms of where we're going in terms of national politics, what lessons can you think we could draw from the Apsana Begum trial in the sense of public institutions? There is an accusation that public funds was used for what many people perceive a political persecution of a prosecution. That's the angle. I'll allow Andrew to come in from the other perspective. Peter?
Yeah, firstly, apologies for not showing my face, as it were. I have two comments to make for things like Facebook or YouTube work. I let you down badly, but I'm very proud to be on the program. And I don't know the details of the trial. I don't want to lead to any conclusions. It could be that it was simply that authorities did bring cases against people, and they, British justice is good, and you're innocent, you can't prove, the prosecution can't prove guilt. The person gets off, and that's how it should be in this country. To talk generally, there are all kinds of reasons for alarm, stretching back to the Iraq War and before, to worry about the confusion of categories really in British public life. The legal profession, the rule of law, the high court, courts should be completely independent of the police, and from the judiciary should be independent of the of politicians, and the justice that you should not be able to use the rule of law for criminal justice, and then there's the other matter of political integrity, the embedded principle of fairness in British public life, and honesty, which is that we have a common area of facts on which all of us can agree, and it's wrong that we should be able to abuse those facts, and that is what I've done in my recent book on Mr. Boris Johnson, the British Prime Minister, who manipulates, cheats, lies, schematically fabricates, and he was a member of ordinary, an ordinary person who you knew you didn't have any business with. You wouldn't do business with him. He worked in the city, and he tried to sell shares on the basis that he tried to sell winning votes. He'd be arrested and sent to jail for fraud.
Okay. Andrew, do you want to come in? Because obviously, Andrew, you've been looking at it's kind of interesting how the trial has split people locally. One section see it as a political persecution. Another section has more questions in terms of the local MP and her conduct. Andrew, do you want to come in on from that angle in terms of what Peter's been saying as well about our national culture?
So I think, yes, that's part of the problem locally, is opinion is split between those two opposing views. And I think the other part of the problem is there's not a lot of information in the public domain that can be trusted or is accurate to actually allow people to sort of draw an accurate conclusion. I think I probably know more than most people because I attended, several days or more than several days of the trial itself. So I have my personal view, but I didn't attend the whole trial either. But I think probably the one clear lesson for me, and I think most people would agree on, and I think this is slightly different from what we've just been discussing, is what is unusual in this case is it's actually the local authority, Tower Hamlets Council, that is the prosecuting authority. And I think that is relatively rare in the UK to have such a high profile trial actually started, initiated and controlled by Tower Hamlets Council itself. And I think really for me, the question is A, whether in this particular case, they should not have passed that on to somebody else. And I think there are reasons why they should have done. And then B, it does raise wider issues about whether actually local authorities should have this power in the first place. And one of the comments I've made back to the local authority and to the audit committee and to the chair of Ovian Scrutiny is, I've been a councillor for more than 7 years now. We've not once in my experience ever actually looked at how we do this process. How does a local authority decide to prosecute somebody? What are the internal checks and balances? How do we ensure that the politicians stay out of it? I'm convinced that John Biggs stayed out of this, but I have no evidence for that. I just know that's what he would do. So how can we be sure that it was free from political control? So it does raise a whole wide range of issues, because at the end of the day, the local authority does have the power to prosecute somebody and send them to jail potentially for years of their life. And then on the back of that has the ability through poker and various other things to then reclaim, very large amounts of money from people as well. And I'm not sure whether we as local authorities should actually have that power. I'm not sure I trust us enough to have that level of responsibility. So I think that's a slightly difference from the national picture. And then therefore the suggestion should be is that somebody like the CPS should be doing this kind of job.
Yeah, I'm actually quite surprised by what Andrew's saying there. I mean, it seems odd. Andrew, can I ask you a question? Presumably, it's in the civil servants, the officials, who have that power to launch a prosecution, not the actual elected councillors.
Yes, in my understanding is exactly that. But one of my points is that process isn't really written down or documented within Tower Hamlets Council. So I know that, for example, Mayor John Biggs, he's such a capable politician. I would be astonished if he got personally involved in the detail of this trial. But another leader under different circumstances, who knows? I have no comfort from what I know as to exactly what the internal, I guess, the Chinese walls were within the council as to who knew what about this case. And I think that's one of the things that worries me about local authorities having these powers, is that a lot of this stuff is just not visible.
I completely agree with you. I think this needs to be discussed and explained. If you took this to a national level and say the Priti Patel's Home Office had the right to prosecute without going through the proper procedure of going to the CPS, Crown Prosecution Service, so it was independent and there was an independent process and a legal process. I think a lot of people would find that very troubling. Or again, taking another example, if the Department of Wealth Pensions have the right to prosecute people directly for fraud, it obviously is much better. I mean, it's essential that that right is passed over to the Attorney General and the Crown Prosecution Service, and so they're taken away from the people who have, maybe compiling the evidence and so on.
Yeah, because I think, one of the problems we've now got is that we've got a local authority and one of its two local MPs. They've just tried to prosecute. So how that working relationship is going to work for the coming years is going to be very interesting. But it's in everybody's interest that the two of them, the MP and the local authority, are able to work together on common issues. And I think that's another reason for trying to separate out the ability to prosecute, either in this case or more generally. It's also councillors. So we've actually had three councillors, but it's only the last two cases. We've had two Tower Hamlets councillors who've been prosecuted by Tower Hamlets Council for housing fraud. In both cases, they actually pled guilty and they were sent to jail. So this has been our third case of this kind, but in this case, the MP, and in this case, it wasn't successful. So it's not just MPs that we prosecute.
Ordinary state of affairs, and I think most people in this, obviously I don't live in Tower Hamlets. I don't know much about it. It's day-to-day life. I mean, it sounds absolutely astonishing that the Tower Hamlets could directly prosecute an MP. And given, I think it is fair to say that Tower Hamlets is notorious for sort of sectarian division and so on, and acrimony. Is that a fair comment?
Andrew, do you want to come in on that?
So all I'll say is Tower Hamlets is probably the most interesting political place in the United Kingdom, if we exclude maybe Scotland. But it is a very interesting place, but deep divisions in a range of areas, high levels of inequality, and very interesting political environment as well. So we're not really like many other parts of the United Kingdom. So,
by the way, it's a wonderful place. I go there. I love going to Tower Hamlets. I don't want to get full of all these people. It's just that there is a reputation for politics, particularly lively, shall we say, to use a polite word. And makes it all the more, concerned that the council itself can directly launch a legal prosecution against the local MP. That's quite something, isn't it? It's quite an odd thing to happen. And I think, and if that does launch an action against the local MP, very serious, must of course, the MP, someone then how the decision was made, given that she was found to be innocent.
We're gonna go straight into a break. After the break, we're gonna have a discussion about how we can make things better. How can we strengthen institutions? How can we strengthen our political culture? How can we have more checks and balances? And we're gonna start from the national level. Pete has written extensively about the problem, and then see what we can do locally. So we're going to go straight into a break.
Cycling in London is not child's play. How to be a better cyclist. Listen to my show, only on Relax Radio. I'm Kevin. Join me every Thursday, 5 p.m. Look forward to seeing you.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the weekly politics show. I'm Councillor Puru Miah with co-host Councillor Andrew Wood, and we're joined on my loudspeaker by veteran journalist Peter Oborne. So in this section, we're going to discuss about possible solutions. So I'm going to start off with Peter. Peter, you've written extensively about this problem, starting with the Blair years, going over to Cameron, and now Johnson. What are the solutions? How can we strengthen our public institutions and the political culture to make sure things like this don't happen again?
Yeah, that's a veteran journalist, Peru. I regard myself as a spring chicken, and so it is true that I was there at the time of the Iraq invasion, and the terrible misinformation put out by the British government about weapons of mass destruction, and that led to this terrible war, which its consequences are still being felt to this day, and also the misjudgments, terrible misjudgments, I think, made about in Afghanistan, which has become very relevant again today. So I have an old-fashioned idea, but I don't think there's anything wrong with it. Is the politicians should tell the truth, and they should be honourable, and they should not allow their private interests to interfere with their public duties. And that's as relevant in Westminster as it is in Tower Hamlets or any other local council. That there is a problem when you get rogue operators in the British system, which relies on people acting in an honourable way. Now, we have a rogue operator now in the shape of Boris Johnson, the Conservative Prime Minister. And he has, and the fact that here we have a man who ignores the ministerial code, who appoints his cronies to important positions, who can't tell who rewards party donors, and who lies and cheats all the time, and then lies about lying. It's a real problem because it sends out a terrible message to ordinary people that it doesn't matter if you lie and cheat, and it really does. And in fact, perjury in a courtroom will get you sent to jail. Lying in a courtroom will take you. So what do we do? have a look at, you have to take away, the moment unbelievably, who is in charge of the ministerial code, who is responsible for it, which the ministerial code says you should act with integrity and decency and honour and should rely on private interests. They should declare them and should allow them to influence your decision. Who makes the final decision about the ministerial code? Lo and behold, it's Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Well, that's unacceptable. You can't have that. You've got to have a broader body making the decisions about whether that code has been breached. And I can tell you, this must not be shocked, Mr. Johnson has breached the code on multiple occasions, dozens of occasions. The Prime Minister of this country has breached the ministerial code which demands honest conduct. And you have a road operator making decisions about public integrity. That's terrible. And of course it applies at the local level as well. And so we need to change the law about how integrity is enforced at the heart of our public life.
Do you want to come in? How do we protect ourselves from rogue operators in Tower Hamlets? There seems to be quite a few of them alleged of wandering around in our public institutions. What's your take? Sorry, you're on mute, Andrew.
Yeah, so my niece just came in and I had to mute in case she said anything inappropriate. No, so I mean, it's interesting because actually with Peter on the call, actually, I think the answer is better reporting and better journalism within Tower Hamlets. We've only got really one newspaper, East London Advertiser, but they don't cover some of the stuff in a great level of detail. And as a result, there's a lot of misinformation out there or misunderstanding about what happened. And I think one of the solutions within Tower Hamlets would be actually, more detailed reporting. There is one individual, a gentleman called Mark Baines, who runs our East End, who attempts to do this, isn't liked by some people, and he struggles. He's not a sort of professional journalist. He's not paid to do this, but he's pretty much the only person that's trying to cover some of this detail. And I think the solution would be, better local journalism, better local newspapers. Funnily enough, I'm actually in Germany today, and I'm looking across at the offices of the local newspaper. It's a town of about 45,000 people, and they've got their own newspaper. And I wish we had the same in places like my part of Tower Hamlets. And I think if we had better reporting and the politicians knew that people were there to watch them, then I think the politicians would be more careful about what they do and what they say. But there's too few people in Tower Hamlets really fulfilling that role. And some of those who do, like Mark, they're seen as partisan figures, or it's me. I'm a politician. So when I say things, obviously people assume I have a political edge, even though I think what I'm reporting generally is pretty accurate. So I think that would be part of the solution, would be better, more accurate local journalism. But how we do that, I'm not entirely sure. And that's maybe another area where Peter could comment.
Peter.
I'd just like to echo, Andrew, you're absolutely right. One of the problems is the kind of collapse of the economics of the newspaper media industry. And that means that there aren't many, as a local journalist has fallen away, and of course it's subject to all kinds of pressure. And of course that applies, it's very interesting, I write about very interesting about the discussions that mirror at the local level in Tower Hamlets what's going on nationally. So nationally, we have the same problem that there are too many client journalists in the big newspaper groups who don't see their job as a job of journalism, but actually support the lies of the Prime Minister, repeat them, and then actually attack people who expose the dishonesty of the government. And they're not really journalists, they're client journalists. And what we want is good, solid journalism. And there are examples of it, by the way, of some terrific work being done by the Financial Times at the moment, exposing the bent financial structures around the Prime Minister, how he raises money. And there's some of the terrific new journalist called Gabriel Pogron, new on the block, really, and the Sunday Times has been doing the same thing. There are a few of them, but not nearly enough, and I won't name and shame the people who haven't been doing that. But we
Thank you, Peter, and we look forward to, Andrew and I look forward to collaborating with you.
The other thing I learned a tremendous amount talking to Andrew. Thank you, Andrew. I really enjoyed that conversation. Learned that I think you really do need to think about the way you carry out prosecutions in Ghana. But thank you very much.
No, thank you, Peter. Thank you very much. So, bye. Cool. So that's Peter Oborne signing off. So that was an experiment kind of that we've done where technology doesn't work and we go back to old technology. So we're going to go slightly early into a break because the next section is going to be a bit more lengthy, and that is further questions Andrew has posed to Tower Hamlets Council, and there's a bit of a legal caveat, or there's been some like the legal department at Tower Hamlets Council has flashed warning signs. So we're gonna navigate through these tricky waters, Andrew and I, together. So we're gonna go straight into a break. After that, we're gonna discuss further questions for Tower Hamlets Council regarding the prosecution acquittal of Apsana Begum. Hi everyone, welcome back to the Weekly Politics Show. I'm Councillor Puru Miah with co-host Councillor Andrew Wood. So in this section, we're going to discuss further questions for Tower Hamlets Council in regards to the Apsana Begum trial and acquittal. So a few caveats. I'm going to come with my caveat first and then Andrew with his, because there's been some correspondences with the legal department at Tower Hamlets Council, and I've also been tagged on social media in regards to certain things. So my caveat is as my day job, I work in the civil service, in the court service. So our position is we're professional, we're neutral arbitrators. We are not expected to discuss any outcomes in regards to any judgments. Our role as civil servants is to support the judiciary in their matter. Hence, I have not discussed the outcome, but I have raised a local government questions in regards to the trial and acquittal as my role as a Tower Hamlets councillor. and that's the fine line I'm expected to walk in terms of instructions from my managers. But over to you, Andrew. You've had also correspondences from Tower Hamlets legal department, so you've been asked to walk a fine line as well in regards to this and how you talk about the further questions you've raised.
Yeah, so I'm a member of the audit committee at Tower Hamlets Council, and the audit committee is responsible for fraud and fraud prevention. I'm also a member of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, which is again responsible for looking at the actions of the administration as a whole, officers as well as the mayor. So one of the reasons why I did attend many days of the trial is because I thought it would be a good view into some of the details of how the council operates that I ordinarily wouldn't learn about or wouldn't be told about. So I thought it would be very interesting, and it was. And one of the things I told the audit committee, because we actually had a meeting on the Thursday, the day before the not guilty verdicts were announced, I sort of said, this is clearly a major subject for us to discuss in the future, but we can't talk about it tonight because the jury is still out. So what I did say is said I'd email them. So I sent them a couple of days ago, audit committee members, the chair of Overview and Scrutiny, and the senior council officers, a very detailed email with 13 points in it, with issues that I thought, not all of them directly for audit, but I thought would be useful for audit. And certainly many of them are either for audit committee or Overview and Scrutiny, and I'll explain what some of them are in a minute. The response from the senior officers is that, well, I won't read out what they sort of said. I think that would be inappropriate. But basically, I'm being told not to discuss it, what I put in that email. And some of it is, it is confidential. Some of it I'm not going to put in the public domain because there was things revealed in public court, and there was public open session, which were very personal to a number of people. And I'm not going to repeat some of that personal detail because I don't think it's appropriate. And frankly, I don't think people need to know some of that detail. But if I kind of go through some of the stuff in the email that I kind of raised, not in any particular order. So, one of the questions was about, Apsana Begum, raised the issue about domestic abuse. She raised it in advance of the trial. So how did we as Tower Hamlets Council respond to that issue? Because obviously we have, various responsibilities, for example, violence against women and young girls. So this is a very difficult situation for us. And as I've talked earlier with Peter about one of the things so the third point in the email is about, how do we manage this process internally within the council? Who takes the decisions? I'm assuming it's the chief exec with the support of the legal team, but I don't know. That's just my assumption. It's never been explained to us how we do this. We've never had a scrutiny session looking at this issue. And I do think, and that's, as I said, the third point, that I think we need to have a more general understanding, not this specific case, but just how do we do this? How do we make these decisions? What are the checks and balances? How do we make sure that we're not making mistakes? The second point in my email is a very simple one, is that, the emails were lost due to an IT error, but it raises for me broader issues about how long do we retain emails for? So, if somebody leaves the organization, do we get rid of them the next day, or do we keep them for 6 months or 6 years? I don't know the answer to that, and that might be quite useful to understand, because sometimes emails like that can be very useful in sort of either fraud or employment tribunal cases. The kind of next point was to do with the level of barrister experience that the council employed. The next point was witness training and selection. We had a number of council officers who gave testimony. One of them did an excellent job. She was really good. She was very authentic, and I think the jury sort of really liked what she had to say. But there was another council officer where apparently it went very. I missed that morning session, but apparently it was so bad that in the afternoon session where I attended, the judge actually made a joke about a council officer falling apart when they were cross-examined, and that did cause issues for the council. So how do we train our staff? How do we make sure that our council staff who do go to give, witness statements or who go to attend court, what training and support do we give to them? Because that's quite a big responsibility to take on. One of the key issues, and I think this is pretty much in the public domain already, is that certainly at that point in time, there was no policy about how do we define overcrowding. So, if you have a house with 5 rooms in it, how do you interpret those rooms in terms of overcrowding? And apparently we didn't have a policy at that point in time. And apparently within the department, there were differences of opinion about how you interpret the house that she lived in. So the question I'm asking is, do we have an overcrowding policy? And if not, I think we should probably write one. So some of the other points were about whistleblower. So one of the things in our whistleblower policy, it says that if you whistleblow to Tower Hamlets Council, your identity, and I'm reading from the council documents now, your identity will be kept confidential so long as it does not hinder or frustrate any investigation. We will always ask you for consent if we need to disclose your identity. So what happened in this case is the identity of somebody, a member of the public, was revealed to the defence, and that person's name was revealed, mentioned often in court, but Tower Hamlets Council never asked that person's consent to share their name. So I take the view that if you want to whistleblow to Tower Hamlets Council, you probably shouldn't use your real name. You should, I know at least one other case where somebody did do a report of a fraud case. They created a fake email address and a fake name, and that's how they reported it. And that might be what other people might wish to do as well. There were other issues about, for example, bidding system security. So back in 2013, it was pretty easy to get into the bidding system. I think that has greatly improved over the years, so it's a much more secure system. But again, I'm not entirely sure. I've never seen any detail. One of the issues was about when Apsana Begum stopped bidding in let me rephrase that. Somebody stopped bidding in 2014. But it was only a year later that the council started the process of asking whether or not she wanted to start rebidding or not. So one of my questions would be, should we perhaps be doing that more quickly? So if somebody stops bidding on the housing system after 6 months, is that perhaps a clue that their circumstances have changed, and perhaps we should check in with them after 6 months? Again, I don't know what that process is. Do we email people or do we only send them letters? And then there's other sensitive points which I won't go into, except for the last point I sort of skipped over was, so for me, I actually had to stop myself laughing in court at one point, because the defence did a really good job, to be fair, and I think I said this at the last radio show, is they gave a clear impression that councillors sort of had more power in Tower Hamlets than I thought we had power in Tower Hamlets, especially as regards housing and prosecutions. So, for example, one of the things I sort of was quite interested to find out was that not once did the prosecution ever really talk about the fact that we have an executive mayor in Tower Hamlets, and therefore all executive power rests with Mayor John Biggs. So the impression kind of given, so they talked about the mayor's office because that was relevant to one part of the defence, but they never really explained what that meant. So if you live in London, the reality is that most people live in local authorities where the councillors actually do have power and do form part of the leadership, and that's not the case in Tower Hamlets. But that point was never explained to the jury. So there were a couple of points where I thought the jury didn't fully understand how Tower Hamlets worked, and this is a big irony, because it was Tower Hamlets Council who were doing the prosecuting, and they weren't even able to demonstrate to the jury actually how Tower Hamlets worked. And even at one point, the judge actually had to ask. She was getting confused between Tower Hamlets Homes, the mayor's office, the lettings team. How did they all connect? So she asked for some clarity on that, and that should have been, that's the first thing the prosecution should have done, is paint a picture of how Tower Hamlets work. So anyway, so that's why I put a lot more detail in that in the email to the audit committee, and it'll be very interesting to see over the coming months to what extent the audit committee and overview and scrutiny committee and officers are willing to dig into some of the detail of this. Some of this is not directly relevant, and we're probably never ever going to prosecute a member of parliament again. I very much doubt that will ever happen again. So some of this stuff is probably not going to be relevant to future prosecutions, but I think some of it is, and I think there are lessons for us to learn. Whether it's, the lesson could be we should never have prosecuted Apsana Begum in the first case. There's definitely evidence for that. Or there's a case that, the prosecution could have done a better job. There's also evidence for that as well. But I think clearly there's lots of lessons, and some of these lessons, like, for example, the security of the bidding system, are kind of not directly related to this case at all. They're just simply good housekeeping practice. So that's what was in the email, and it'd be interesting, as I said, to find out what happens as a result of that email over the coming weeks. So
I think just to pick up on your earlier point, there's a lack of clarity as to what happened, what was the trial about, what were the facts of the trial. So what I find interesting is there's different narratives are out there. So there's one narrative that Councillor Huq, who's the ex-husband of Apsana Begum, he through his scrutiny housing subcommittee basically controlled the entire investigation. Now, Andrew and I know what the power of scrutiny is. It's just a gentle reminder. That's all you can do. Scrutiny. You don't have any power of directions or anything like that. It's 100% executive mayoral model. So the mayor has 100% power. His cabinet are there to assist him and advise him, and the role of councillors is just to remind him. That's all we can do. So the officers do not follow any instructions of any councillors apart from the mayor or any delegated power. So it was kind of interesting that this narrative that there was, the ex-husband was directing this prosecution from July 2019. And it's a very malicious prosecution following what is alleged a troubled marriage. So that's one narrative, and then the other narrative is that this has been a series of cock-ups. Pardon my French. It's just one mistake after another, and it seems to be bungling. And there's another one. There seems to be double standards by the former councillor Shahid Ali, who accused the council of going hard on him and going easy on the MP. The lonely councillor gets a silk and a junior, and the MP gets a junior barrister, and he felt quite aggrieved by that. I know he made a social media comment on various places, and I believe he spoke to you, Andrew, as well, quite irate.
So that's one of the details in my email is actually that question, and I actually name him as the source of that, because again, and I do think, like a lot of things with Tower Hamlets, it's a mixture of different things, and mistakes and errors are a part of it, and some of it is like losing the emails. These things happen, but it didn't help. Actually, didn't help either, because actually it affected the defence and it also affected the prosecution as well. And there were other mistakes and sort of errors made as well, and some of them, it won't be issues for the future, but some of them will be. And I think if we are to learn the lessons, then some of these issues we do need to look at and to rebuild confidence in. Because a lot of people, have no confidence in the housing bidding system. They think, and I've seen again comments on social media about people sort of saying, well, I've been waiting for 5 years for a 1-bedroom, and why haven't I got anything, and I'm being forced out of Tower Hamlets. And how do you give those people answers as to actually sort of what happened? So one of the things I'm thinking about is, I think somebody does need to write something that is sort of reasonably accurate, or at least tries to outline what the facts are, and then separately kind of put the interpretation in, because right now there's a lot of misinformation out there. And I think in summary, I can see why the council decided to do something, but I think on reflection, the first charge I don't think was sustainable. I think the second charge, definitely there was housing fraud. That is undeniable. The difficulty is who committed that housing fraud, and the prosecution clearly didn't prove that was Apsana Begum. And then the third charge, I won't. I have to think about what I'm going to say about that one, because it's a difficult one in terms of the overall results. But that's, I think maybe the third charge was probably the strongest of the three, but there are also great difficulties as to how it was presented and whether or not you could actually prove fraud, because as I said in the previous radio show, it's actually quite a high bar to achieve. And I'm not sure well, obviously the jury agreed that they didn't reach that bar, and ultimately they're the deciders of this, not me. So
one thing that I find quite concerning is housing allocation is transfer of a public asset for a social need. Yet what I found fascinating was a lot of it's down to discretion of officers. You know, the discussion that they had, oh, is it overcrowding? Or some officer thinks it's overcrowding. The whole thing is kind of like a mystery, even to us as elected officials, and even to the officers working in the department. There doesn't seem to be any clarity, and that's where the problems come, and that's where the accusations come. That's where the loss of trust is, and we just need to rationalize or systemize or explain things properly in an open, transparent way, which the trial has revealed isn't the case, and we need to do that. We're going to go, we're near the end of this segment. We're going to go straight into a break. After the break, we're going to talk about the Weavers by-election. There's different interpretations as to why it's happened. One of them I saw on social media is because were agitated about the trial, that they all came out en masse and punished the Labour Party, but there's all these other reasons as well. So we're going to go short break, and then we're going to go straight into the Weavers by-election. So join us after the break. Hi everyone, welcome back to the weekly politics show. I'm Councillor Puru Miah with co-host Councillor Andrew Wood on Relax Radio. So we're going to talk about the Weavers by-election and the possible reasons for what is a bad night for the local Labour Party. There's a consensus on that, but it seems like there's different reasons as to why this has happened. I was mildly surprised in the afternoon to see a whole series of tweets on social media that it's related to the trial and acquittal of Apsana Begum, but then I've seen other reasons, and I've written a interesting reflective piece on Weavers by-election. But Andrew, over to you. You did the stats before the election. The results were declared. Just breaking down that what, in a sense, was one of the safest Labour wards in Tower Hamlets has fallen.
Yeah. No, because I just did a tweet exactly at 10 p.m. last night, because I'd heard Labour were in trouble. And in theory, that shouldn't have been the case, because it is, as you said, one of the safest Labour wards, because it was originally a Liberal Democrat ward up until around sort of 2006. And then after that, it became a very safe Labour seat, increasingly safe. You know, so to give you an example, in May 2018, Labour got 52% of the vote in May 2018. They won by-elections in 2008 and 2012. They won it in 2010, 2014, and 2018. But what the other thing I sort of did is I sort of did some analysis comparing May 2018 with the results yesterday. And the Aspire share of the vote went from 17% up to 46%. So that's a 30% increase. Labour went from 52 down to 29%. Conservatives went from 7 to 14%. Green went from 10% down to 8%. Liberal Democrats went from 6% down to 2%. So basically, both the Aspire and Conservatives increased their share of the vote, and everybody else declined. So, you know, a lot of people are also sort of saying it's related to livable streets, and it is interesting that those two parties that increased their votes were both campaigning quite strongly on livable streets and wanting to make changes to how they work. So I don't think you can make a direct correlation, because obviously there are always other issues, the Apsana Begum trial perhaps, but it certainly there is a strong suggestion that livable streets was one of the reasons why Labour lost what should have been, in theory, a very safe ward yesterday.
I think, from my experience, livable streets was one of the key issues. As a Labour canvasser, I remember before each session, we were briefed on livable streets. We did ask for a line to give to residents. The local Labour Party was collecting data of people who showed hostility towards livable streets, so they could write a letter to them. And there were talks of the actual policy being rolled back, and it was kind of interesting. And there are rumours that the policy might be rolled back. I heard there was an announcement on Monday, but then that meeting got cancelled where that announcement was going to be. So it shows how much fluid it is. But I know many people saw it as a referendum on livable streets, with 63% of residents voting against low traffic neighborhoods. Where do we, in terms of livable streets and low traffic neighborhoods, how do we take it forward, the debate, etc.? I know yourself, Andrew, and I have campaigned vociferously against the flawed consultation, the flawed rollout. Do you see it as a victory for the campaign?
Yeah, so my issue has always been, everybody likes livable streets. Everybody wants better streets, There are very few people who really want lots of vehicles rat running. And this started off in Wapping with Wapping residents campaigning for years to stop people rat running through their neighborhoods. So, how did we start with something that had really broad community support to where arguably, and we can argue exactly how much I think it contributed to Labour's loss yesterday. And I think what we have to do is go back and find out, what do residents want, and sort of almost kind of restart the process. And in terms of livable streets itself, I don't think they're even halfway through the process. There's still large sections of Tower Hamlets still to do. I know there's work on Shadwell that's sort of ongoing. The Barkentine and my ward, they're just finishing off some of the work, but they've skipped other bits, and they were meant to do other parts of the island. So in terms of the total programme, they're not at the halfway point yet. So I think this is an opportunity to kind of restart the conversation. And personally, my view is that, emergency vehicle access is a critical issue. We need to work much more closely with them about how they have access. I really prefer bus camera gates, because you can allow people, the right people through, disabled, elderly, taxis, for example, through, and then the rat run is from outside of Tower Hamlets or from the wrong part of Tower Hamlets, you can then fine at the appropriate points. That for me would be a much better solution, and I'm sure other people will have different views. So what I'm hoping is that the Mayor and Labour Party will see this as a reset opportunity, and not just stop the whole thing, because there are some good things to livable streets. But one of my main issues is again, the other issue that was the top of people's concerns, certainly in terms of the Aspire leaflets, and I know for Conservatives as well, was antisocial behaviour. We're spending 10 times as much on livable streets as we are on antisocial behaviour in terms of capex spend. Is that the right distribution of monies? And I think not. And I would personally argue that the Weavers ward is perhaps evidence of that. So is that another opportunity to have a debate about some of these issues, especially with the budget coming not many months away?
Well, I think it was you, Andrew, who framed it first as the referendum on unlivable streets, and that was actually picked up by Mayor John Biggs, who, in a gathering that I was, insisted that it wasn't a referendum on livable streets, but clearly from Kabir Ahmed's victory speech, he did make livable streets the prominent issue in that video piece where we saw the back of the head of the mayor walking off, so as the opposition group, are you going to take it forward at the next? I know you've got so many stuff in your in tray. What do you go with? What are you thinking of going ahead with in September's full council?
I was talking to Councillor Peter Golds about that earlier, because we've only got 3 council meetings left before next May's elections, plus budget, of course. And there's an awful lot of stuff and we missed council meetings last year, so there's an awful lot of things that we still want to raise. So I sort of don't know, but one of the interesting things as a result of yesterday is that there are now 2 opposition groups in Tower Hamlets Council, because you need 2 councillors to form a group. And now Aspire have got 2, and the Conservative group, with me as an independent, are two groups. So that will be interesting to see what happens for the next 9 months. I mean, one of the, as a reminder, and I have to remind myself about this, back in 2016, whatever you wanted to call them, I think technically they were independents at that point, but in Whitechapel ward, there was a by-election in 2016 that Aspire / Tower Hamlets First won, and they then lost that ward in 2018. So, Labour may take the view that, well, they'll just win this back next May, which is certainly possible, but I think they're going to have to do a lot of work. And I think my gut says the odds are against them, that actually that result yesterday could be repeated next May in a number of wards, because, the administration just aren't doing a good enough job. And I think the mayor knows that himself. He made some, very interesting comments about the swimming pool closures. So out of the 5 council swimming pools, 3 of them are currently closed. One of them, St George's, may never reopen, and the other 2, Cllr and York Hall, have been closed for months more than they need to be, because there are repair problems and they need to be fixed. And why was that allowed to happen, that we've only now got 2 out of 5 operational? And I know the mayor was very disappointed about that, but ultimately it's his responsibility. And I could go on, but we don't have the time to talk about that. So
I think that's an ongoing issue. I know I've been hearing rumours about the closure of St George's for nearly over a decade now. It's been earmarked for housing, and there are residents who think this is part of a wider conspiracy to just let it run down, because the actual value of the land is more than the actual value of the swimming pool, and they suspect council officers have other intentions, and that's always been the case. But we're coming near to the end of our show. Andrew, going back to the Apsana Begum trial and acquittal, when do you expect an answer to those questions, or when do you expect an answer? Is it going to be an audit, or is it going to be when would you publish those answers to the questions you've raised?
Well, I know a number of key people are away on holiday this month, including technically myself. So I think we're not going to get any sort of quick answers, and it'll be up to the audit committee to have a think about this as well. And I know the chair has seen my email, and she's responded that she will have a think about it and come back after her holidays. And some of this stuff we don't need to solve in the next couple of weeks. Some of this stuff is, we have to have a think about. And interesting that, audit committee already thinking about, because we've got issues with our housing waiting list. We knew that already. So there was a piece of internal audit work, and there's going to be some work done in the housing regeneration committee. So some of this stuff is already in process anyway. But in terms of my emails with the council, that will happen over the coming weeks. And some of that I will put in not their emails. Some of my original email I will put in the public domain, because I think it is in the public interest. I will strip out personal and sensitive information, and I won't reveal everything, but I'll make it clear the reasons why I'm not publishing everything. So yes, so you'll probably see something in a couple of weeks' time.
Yeah. And on a final note, there is a petition that's out there. I know we've all been tagged on social media. Is that something that you, as the opposition group, would support, a public investigation inquiry into? Is that the best approach in your opinion?
I think, the council have to do something. They can't just sort of pretend it didn't happen. And it comes back to the original point with Peter. I increasingly feel that we shouldn't have this power. And if we are to do it, then we need to be much better at it. Or maybe we are really, because, we have won these prosecutions before. Maybe we were just unlucky in this case. Maybe this is just too close to us. Maybe we should have passed this off to the CPS. But yeah, I don't think we can simply say we're not going to say anything about it. I don't think that's sustainable either. And of course, the other person we haven't really heard from yet is Councillor Etisham Haque. He's had very serious allegations made against him, and we'll see. I mean, he's put out a statement, and we will see what he has to say in the coming weeks and months.
Understood. So it's an issue that's going to roll and roll. We're at the end of our show. I just going to sign off. I just want to thank all our viewers and listeners for joining us at the weekly politics show. This week's show we had Peter Oborne, veteran or not so veteran, spring chicken. That's what he'd like to describe himself, journalist. But thank you again for watching the show and listening to it. I'm Councillor Puru Miah with co-host Councillor Andrew Wood. Thank you again. Bye-bye.